ambiguity acceptance is about complexity at work and how people manage and navigate it. So every workplace, most workplace relationships have some level of ambiguity or complexity in them. And people have different ways of managing it, and people have different levels of comfort with ambiguity, right? There's a few different types of ambiguity. When we look at interpersonal ambiguity, that's when someone sends mixed messages, has different approaches, or when you get a team of people with kind of a diverse set of ideas, opinions, or approaches to different problems. So when you have a whole bunch of different opinions and there isn't necessarily one right answer, how do you manage that ambiguity? Some people find that really interesting and really exciting to figure out why people have different opinions, where they're coming from, what the kind of detail is behind that, and how you can use different opinions or approaches either together or separately to solve a problem. Some people really don't like ambiguity, and that's what trait ambiguity acceptance captures. So some people like to have that complexity. They're kind of interested in the complexity and the dynamics behind things, whereas some people really like to have clear-cut answers. They don't want things that are too complex, or maybe they want really specific guidelines, success criteria, and specific things to focus on. So I've worked sometimes with people who have really low ambiguity acceptance, and I've found that if they've got a set task or a set thing to do, they've got a checklist, they've got a way of structuring their day without too many distractions or complexities, they are amazing workers, especially in combined with conscientiousness. But if you give them a long list of tasks with no order of priority, they'll struggle to decide on which is the most important in that kind of ambiguous guidelines or ambiguous descriptions. Whereas some people, if you give them kind of a broad framework for doing stuff, they like that ambiguity and they like having that freedom to figure out how, when, and why they do it in their own way. But that's why ambiguity acceptance has such a profound effect on how people work and what roles people succeed in. So leadership roles are, by necessity, always complex. There's always going to be people with different opinions about how you should run the company, what the priorities are in the short and long term, the best way to approach that. And ideally, good leaders often set up a team that gives them different sources of advice for different reasons, different backgrounds, different opinions. And in those situations, then it's the CEO's responsibility to get all of that information, make sense of it, and choose the best approach. So in more senior leadership positions, you're going to have more people reporting to you, you're going to have more responsibilities, you're going to have more sources of competing information, right? You might have clients and stakeholders saying one thing, you might have employees who want something else, you might have shareholders that are giving you a different set of pressures, and they all have competing interests from their perspective that from their point of view might be right, but it's not always possible to make sure everyone gets what they want all the time. So you have to figure out how to manage that complexity and that ambiguity in the workplace. Whereas some people will find that really difficult, right? Some people like that focus and they want less ambiguity and less complexity in their workplace. A lot of the research on ambiguity actually originally came from research in the kind of 1940s and 50s after studying characteristics of dictators or autocrats. And we find really low ambiguity acceptance is a characteristic of autocratic leadership styles, right? It's people who want very simple answers, give very simple solutions to very complex problems. And the reason sometimes that's appealing to people is when you can take a complex problem and make it seem like A, it's simple, and then B, you have the answer to it. It's sometimes easy to win followers in that way. The problem that comes from that is those simple solutions don't solve the complex problems, and then you get into this trap of a kind of autocratic leadership style that is very commanding but not necessarily good at solving problems. So really what you want to see in senior strategic leaders is that ambiguity acceptance. And we find especially at the most senior levels of leadership, effective leaders tend to have very high ambiguity acceptance. Not necessarily off the charts, but an optimal place for managing ambiguity in the appropriate way.